The laughter in the banquet hall froze like a knife striking glass. The Admiral's voice had been loud, teasing, the way men sometimes get when they feel untouchable. "Come on," he said, grinning at the woman across the polished oak table, his medals gleaming like small suns. "You were a pilot, weren't you? What was your call sign? Don't be shy. Let's hear it." For a heartbeat, no one breathed. The woman he spoke to didn't smile. Her posture was straight but unthreatening, her hands folded neatly in her lap, a single silver ring catching the golden light of the chandeliers. The uniform she wore was a modest one, a civilian contractor's blue, not the deep navy black that surrounded her. She looked out of place among the admirals and commanders, and perhaps that was why the question had been asked in jest. But when she answered, the air changed. "Iron Widow." Her voice was calm, low, steady. The Admiral's smile vanished. His hand, resting on his glass, went slack. For a split second, the glass trembled before tipping and shattering across the marble floor. The chatter in the room died instantly, leaving behind a silence thick enough to choke on. He stared at her, the color draining from his face, the laughter turned to a cold, haunted recognition. Around them, officers glanced at one another, trying to understand what they had just witnessed. None of them did, yet. But they would. Only she sat unmoving, eyes fixed forward, her expression unreadable. The banquet hall had been meant to celebrate fleet unity, a polished event of speeches, champagne, and medals. The woman hadn't wanted to attend. She had received a polite invitation from Navy Public Affairs after months of pushing veterans into visibility campaigns. They said they wanted to honor the women of the skies, but she had sensed the shallow intent beneath the polished smiles. Still, she came. Not for recognition, she had long ago turned from that, but for the memory of those who couldn't stand there with her. She looked small among them, slender with dark hair streaked by age and wind, her posture rigid but graceful, the way soldiers hold themselves when the world tries to forget they've bled for it. Her left hand bore faint scars that ran over the knuckles like silver lightning. Her right leg, hidden beneath her long skirt, did not move as easily as the other. She had once walked across Afghan dust with that leg shattered from shrapnel, refusing morphine until the last evac bird was in the sky. To most of the room, she was a quiet veteran turned systems engineer, a footnote in the Navy's long archive of faces. To the Admiral, she had been a name once whispered through encrypted channels, a name spoken only in the tense quiet of command briefings years ago. Iron Widow. The call sign that, in another lifetime, meant air support had arrived, and hell was about to open its doors. Her squadron had been legendary, though classified for years. A team of pilots who flew rescue extractions under fire zones too dangerous for standard clearance. Her call sign wasn't given, it was earned, forged in smoke and loss when her husband's Black Hawk went down and she refused to abandon the field. For 36 hours, she circled the valley, holding off enemy combatants until ground teams could recover the last of the fallen. The mission broke her body and carved her legend. It also ended her career. The Admiral had been there. Not physically in that valley, but in the command center behind safety, where decisions came easy. He had signed the order to withdraw air support 12 hours before she defied him. Her husband's name had been among those lost. She disobeyed, and she saved 15 soldiers. And for that, she had been quietly retired, decorated on paper, erased in spirit. Years later, in this shining hall, their paths crossed again under the pretense of unity. He had not recognized her, perhaps because she no longer wore the pilot's wings. Time had softened her jawline, silvered her hair. But her eyes, those eyes that burned like iron under pressure, had not changed. When she spoke her call sign, something ancient cracked inside him. The laughter that had filled the room moments ago now seemed obscene. The silence stretched until it hurt. Somewhere in the back, a young ensign fidgeted, his chair scraping softly. The Admiral's voice, when it came, was hoarse. Your Iron Widow?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Around them, the banquet continued in the strangled rhythm of forced politeness. Some guests whispered, trying to piece together the sudden gravity that had fallen over the table. Others stared into their glasses, unwilling to meet anyone's eyes. He tried to compose himself, to recover the authority that had drained from his body. "Well," he stammered, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "that's quite the name. Quite the reputation. Didn't realize we had a legend in our midst." Still, she said nothing. He laughed again, quieter this time, but it was the laughter of a man cornered by his own history. I suppose every story has exaggerations, he continued, hoping the room would follow. You know how those old tales get. She raised her gaze slowly to meet his. Her voice was almost a whisper, yet it carried across the table. Only the ones written by those who weren't there. No one dared breathe. In that moment, every officer at that table understood that something much larger than a conversation was unfolding. This was not about ego or embarrassment. It was about truth. The kind that buries itself in sealed files and classified briefings until the years dull its edges, until someone dares to speak again. Inside, the Admiral felt a sting he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Guilt, the kind that doesn't fade with metals. He saw again the valley on the monitor, the smoke blooming across the feed, the broken signal, the voice that refused to retreat. He remembered the reprimand he had signed with a steady hand while the young widow was still in surgery. She could have ruined him then. She never did. She had simply walked away from the world that had used her courage as a headline and her disobedience as a liability. He had told himself, over the years, that it was all procedure, that she had known the risks, that wars require order. But looking at her now, alive, scarred, silent, he felt the truth press on his chest like a weight he could no longer bear. And she? She didn't need to see him collapse in remorse. She had lived through worse. She had watched mountains burn and skies fall. What was one man's guilt compared to that? The evening dragged on. Plates clattered softly, glasses refilled by servers pretending not to notice the tension. When the time came for the group photo, she stood at the far edge, half in shadow. The Admiral avoided her gaze, his hand trembling slightly as he adjusted his medals. Later, as the crowd thinned, she found herself alone near the portraits of past commanders lining the hall. Each face looked out with solemn pride, framed in gold. She traced one edge with her eyes, remembering the men and women who never got a frame, never got their names etched in brass. Behind her, footsteps approached. She didn't turn. "You should have told me," he said quietly. "You should have said something." She finally faced him. Would it have changed anything? He hesitated. Maybe. Her smile was tired but kind, the kind that came from carrying too much for too long. "No. You made your choices. So did I." He nodded slowly, his eyes glistening. "I didn't know you survived that night. They told you what was convenient." Her tone wasn't bitter, only factual. "That's how stories work, Admiral." He lowered his head, and for a long moment, neither spoke. The silence between them carried the weight of years, the echo of rotor blades, the smell of dust and diesel, the screams of men carried through static. When he finally looked up, his voice broke. "I don't know how to make that right." She studied him quietly, then said, "You don't. You just stop pretending it never happened." It was not forgiveness. It was truth. And for the first time, he accepted it. The next morning, the story began to spread, not through gossip, but through reverence. A young ensign had quietly searched her name, uncovering fragments of reports, redacted lines, and one haunting debrief that described a pilot who held the skies alone after command abandoned the field. The tale traveled through corridors and inboxes until it reached the veterans' network. By evening, her call sign, Iron Widow, had returned, whispered not with fear but respect. The irony was not lost on her. She had never sought recognition. Yet it came now, unbidden, because truth has a way of resurfacing no matter how deep it's buried. 2 days later, during the fleet's memorial ceremony, the Admiral stood again on a stage. This time, his voice was different, stripped of performance, weighted with sincerity. He read names of the fallen, one by one, his hands trembling. And when he reached the name of the pilot who had once defied his order, he paused. His eyes met hers in the front row. "Call sign," he said, his voice catching, "Iron Widow." The audience shifted, uncertain. The name had not been on the official list. But as the words left his mouth, something remarkable happened. One by one, the sailors and officers rose to their feet, not in confusion, but in understanding. A tide of silent respect filled the hall. She sat still for a moment, then slowly rose with them, her chin lifted, her expression calm. The moment didn't belong to her alone, it belonged to the memory of those who never returned. The applause that followed was restrained, almost reverent, as though the crowd feared to disturb the sanctity of what had just been acknowledged. The Admiral stepped down from the podium and approached her. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He simply removed one of his own medals and placed it in her hands before saluting her, a gesture that reversed the years of silence. She looked at the medal, then at him. "You finally remembered," she said softly. "I never forgot," he replied, his voice breaking. "I just didn't have the courage to face it." There was no anger left in her. Only quiet understanding. "Courage isn't loud," she murmured. "Sometimes it's just showing up." He bowed his head. From that day, her story spread beyond the walls of the Navy. Veterans spoke her name at gatherings. Pilots whispered it across radio channels as a symbol of defiance and loyalty. She never gave interviews, never accepted awards. She returned to her quiet life on the coast, where the ocean roared like distant engines. Sometimes, children from the local base would visit her workshop, curious about the old aircraft parts she restored for museums. They'd ask about her call sign, and she'd smile faintly, shaking her head. "It's not about the name," she'd say. "It's about who you protect when no one's watching." And that sometimes, the strongest answer is silence.